where we started this Maximum Performance webinar series about a year and almost 2 years ago now, October of 2012. We started this Maximum Performance webinar series with the intention of creating a very vibrant and engaged learning community, bringing top originators from the country together for the purpose of creating powerful learning that's going to help you guys take it to the next level with your business. And as a result, we've had a great ride of providing the webinar series. And so we're very excited and very pleased to have back on our webinar series Mr. James Charlet, who is one of the leading experts in the field of credit services and credit information. James, of course, was a member of the elite Experian legal team and compliance group that defended Experian credit services when having to testify before Congress and when they were having to be represented in lawsuits. Of course, James is also the acting education director for NACSO, which is the National Association of Credit Services Organizations, offering the educational programming and government affairs interactions. He's also a frequent speaker at many of the national conferences around the country and just has an incredible wealth and depth of knowledge of how to help borrowers overcome the unique challenges and intricacies of what bad companies do to try and abuse people's credit for the purpose of trying to illegally collect debts. And of course, James and I have talked many, many times about the importance of credit repair the legal and ethical way, not misrepresenting information for the purpose of committing loan fraud, but for the purpose of correcting the accuracy of information on a borrower's credit so that the borrower is able to enhance their credit score and that their score becomes a more accurate reflection of their actual credit behavior. And in that initiative, James started CRE Credit Services and has a great team of folks that are essentially credit coaches that work with clients to help them win the credit scoring game. And that's what today's program is all about. So without further ado, James, I'm going to hand off to you, and I'm going to let you dive right in. You just tell me when you want to advance slides, and we'll go from there.
All right, great. Thanks for the introduction, for sure, Eric. Welcome, everybody. What we're actually going to do today is kind of a primer or an introduction, if you will, to what is a longer series on credit reporting, credit scoring, inaccuracies, myths and misconceptions, and a concept that I call the gray area. If you would go to the first slide there, Eric.
There you go.
Perfect. So, I guess I kind of already went over this. Let's go to the next one. All right. So for this series today, what we're going to be talking about, as you can see over here, the credit scoring, credit reporting, misconception, gray areas. I'm going to put some definitions on those for everybody. A credit score is a mathematical algorithm that takes a snapshot of where your borrower is right now. One of the first myths we're going to dispel here is that somehow having high balance limit ratios last week or inquiries 3 years ago can echo far into the future, and that's just, it's not the way it works. The credit score looks at everything as it exists at this moment. How long have you had credit now? How many inquiries have you had in the last 2 years, and more particularly in the last 90 to 180 days? What is your current balance limit ratio? But it's all looking at it as it exists at this moment. It's not paying attention to necessarily how you were a month ago or a year ago. It looks at where you're at right now, okay? And it's, again, a mathematical algorithm made up of a series of other algorithms that influence one another, okay? Credit reporting is different than credit bureaus. It's one of those other misconceptions that often calls Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion credit bureaus. They're not. They're credit reporting agencies or repositories. And obviously they are tasked with just storing the information for consumers all over the country. A credit bureau, on the other hand, and forgive my spelling there, wow. A credit bureau is a company that merges that information together, scores it, and resells it to entities like mortgage companies and banks and automobile dealerships, etc. It's a little bit, they get called tri-merge bureau reports because they're coming from the bureau, and they're tri-merge because they're taking 3 different entities, the credit reporting agencies, and merging that data together. Normally those agencies are kind of like Coke, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper. They hate each other and they compete, and that leads to a lot of the what appear to be errors or inaccuracies or inconsistencies on the Bureau because they're taking this information from disparate sources and trying to make it look like one source. A tri-merge, obviously, that's been covered, but a tri-merge consumer report is different. On a consumer report, you have 3 columns that list exactly how information is presented to the consumer. If they include scores, those will be consumer-enhanced scores, which are very, very different in many cases than the real estate-enhanced scores that mortgage providers get, and creates a lot of consumer confusion when perhaps they were on one model that has a different range and they come in thinking they have a 700, but on a mortgage range it's really a 500. And that happens very frequently. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Risk is something that is one of the most important pillars for understanding everything that goes into credit reporting and credit scoring. It's the reason they exist. In the instance of risk here, the risk that we're pretty much always talking about is the risk that whoever's lending money is taking in giving to this person. Are they likely to repay? Are they likely to repay on time? And that one word truly creates 3 different industries that are multi-billion-dollar industries. Credit scoring, credit reporting, and credit bureaus all exist because of this one word. And then the last gray area, we're going to get into that a whole lot through the course of all of this, but essentially gray area is what means that anytime you get a hard and fast, simple answer to a question regarding scoring or reporting, the chances are it's at least somewhat inaccurate, if not completely wrong, because there really are no hard and fast answers. If I were to tell, or if you were to hear from someone that an inquiry always costs 1 to 2 points, for example, that's just not the way it works. If you were to hear that it's okay to have balances on 8 accounts but no more, that's not the way it works. One person might have a credit history that a bank can justify and trust them with having balances on 20 accounts without a very negative impact on the score, whereas someone with a poor or short credit history might be negatively impacted for having balances on 5 accounts. It's just different for each person because each credit report is indeed a fingerprint, and again is a snapshot when it goes into the scoring algorithm. All right, so that's the definitions for those as we move forward here. Let's go to the next slide, Eric. And just to make sure, we did have one person say that they couldn't see the slides, only the original race car. Has that been rectified, Glenda?
It should be updated at this point. All right, so you want to be
cool.
So we should be on the scoring algorithm stage?
Yep, absolutely. We're good to go there. All right, so we've already mentioned it as a mathematical algorithm. And you know, when you talk to a consumer just walking down the street, if this was a Dave Letterman show and we were doing the citizen on the street questions, they might, if they're savvy, say that they have 3 scores. I think a majority of people would say, oh, I just have a credit score. And obviously we all know that that's just not the way it works. Most people aren't aware of exactly how many scores they do have. The fact of the matter is that Fair Isaac Corporation alone, which granted does hold the lion's share of the credit scoring market, but not all of it, they have 23 different models that they sell right now. There's actually about to be a 24th, and within each of those models, there are several different industries that can have a specification. So you might have a Fair Isaac Classic 04 score with a real estate enhancement, and what that's going to do is make the payment history on real estate style accounts, whether it's a HELOC or a mortgage or a second mortgage or a timeshare, anything that's real estate, have both greater and lesser impacts, for example, or for good or bad scores. So it might lessen the impact of a charged off credit card, but significantly increase the weight of a foreclosed property. Likewise, payment history, whether positive payment history is going to be better for the scoring algorithm, negative payment history on a real estate account is going to be more negative than negative payment history on a student loan, for example. So the bottom line is, with the different models, and there are other companies, of course, there's Vantage Score, there's Beacon Score, there's Trans Risk, there's Empirica, there's Plus Score, just to name a few. And each one of those can also have industry enhancements as well and bank enhancements. So the bottom line is, of the question of how many different varieties of score, how many different models, it's thousands. It's thousands based on the individual risk model of each bank that purchases purchases it and then tweaks it for their own use. And one of the things that can be different from score to score is the range. So if you're talking about, for example, an Empirica score, which is a model that was developed by TransUnion, that score typically goes on a 200 to 900 range. So it's a lot more variance than on a traditional Fair Isaac score, which goes from 300 to 850. Fair Isaac also has models that go from 350 to 850. National Risk Score goes from 0 to 1,000, well, 1 to 1,000, where 1 is obviously much, much better than 1,000, because what it is claiming to predict is how many people out of 1,000 would default if I lent to them within the next 12 months. So you have different scores trying to predict risk in different varieties that all have different ranges and ways of interpretation. And that's one of the big consumer confusion that I mentioned earlier, is that if you go and purchase a Vantage score, Vantage is a separate corporation owned by the 3 credit reporting agencies that's kind of was designed from the get-go to go head-to-head with Fair Isaac Corporation. And their scoring mechanism goes from 500 to 999, where the 500s are an F and the 600s are a D and the 700s are a C. And you have a consumer that goes to an Experian website, purchases a report, and gets a score of a 715, and they think that's great. But let's be honest, in that particular mechanism, it's a C-. It's going to come out as a somewhere between 590 and 605 most likely in a Fair Isaac score, which is what you're using most likely for your mortgages. So there's a lot of that consumer confusion comes from there. The utilization. We've already basically covered this, but essentially Fair Isaac does control, depending on the source you look at, somewhere between 65 and 75% of the market share, and somewhere north of 95% of the mortgage market share. It's been the most trusted name in credit scoring going all the way back to the 1960s. And so for our purposes here, we're not going to pay a lot of attention to those other methods. We're going to talk about Fair Isaac in particular for the most part. And then the gray area. We already talked about this a little bit. I want to reemphasize with credit scores, not only can everything within a particular credit file influence everybody else, where your length of history might allow you to have more accounts with balances or more installment style accounts or a higher original amount borrowed to amount owed on your installment loans because of the length of your credit history. In addition to that, the credit scores themselves are changed on a regular basis based on the behavior of the general public. The credit scores are all supposed to fall along a bell curve with a termination point at each end, and everybody in America falls somewhere in between those two termination points. But the behavior of the public is measured and changes, and I'm going to give you an example. You might have somebody at Fair Isaac or at Experian working on Plus Score that today they do a study on 10,000 Americans that had a late payment within the last 6 months on an auto and see where they're at today. Have they had late payments on their house? Have they had late payments on credit cards? Have they had additional charge-offs or collections or anything? And if that number of foreclosures or late payments or whatever it is statistically significantly different than the last time the same study was performed, then the credit scoring algorithm will be tweaked to impact the change in behavior of the general public. So for example, you have a client that today you pull her credit, and yeah, she has a late payment 5 months ago on her car, but she's a 655, and that's not as big of a problem perhaps. But because they change the weight of that, you might pull her score the next day, and even though nothing substantial changed on her report, her score drops 15 or 20 points. And it's because the weight and the impact and the usefulness of that previous data was determined to be more impactful, and the change in the algorithm negatively impacted your consumer. Okay? All right, before I move on to the few questions. Yeah, that's what I'm going to look at real quick here. What do you think of? So the first question here is, what do you think of consumers using credit repair companies and telling them that they will delete everything off the credit report when these consumers owe the money? Well, part one of that, I would certainly shy away from any credit repair company that says they're going to delete everything. Quite frankly, in the Fair Credit Reporting Act, it's actually illegal to make misstatements to a credit reporting agency. And we can debate all day as how that would stand up to a First Amendment challenge. Nonetheless, right now, having not been challenged, it's the law of the land. It's actually illegal at the federal level to make misstatements to a credit reporting agency. I think that sometimes, though, the problem isn't the debt or it's the problems with the credit reporting agency a lot of times are that there are a lot of errors. And we were going to talk about this a little bit later, but we'll go ahead and cover it now. I mean, whether it's the FTC doing their Hawk study, whether it's the CFPB, whether it's 60 Minutes, whether it's the National Consumer Law Group, there are a multitude of studies that have shown ridiculous numbers, 45 million Americans with errors that are negatively, falsely impacting their credit scores. I think that if you're going to go to a credit correction, credit service organization, that what you want to be looking for there is that they're going to address the actual errors. There should be no line. There's no need to say an account's not theirs when it is, that they don't owe it if they do, that the late payments shouldn't be there if they should. What it is appropriate, though, is that the federal law, the Fair Credit Reporting Act that governs this, shows that information, or says that information within the credit file should be 100% accurate, complete, and verifiable. And if the credit reporting agency and the subscriber aren't meeting that standard, that is what Congress has set aside to protect consumers, then they're as much a violation of the contract as the consumer is.
How about you give them a few examples, James, of what that would look like for people that they report on today?
Well, I'll do that. Write that down. Let me get these next questions real quick, because I certainly don't want to take anybody's time that they don't have. So the next question we had, are the adjustments by percentage based on the range? For an example, 350 to 850, so a 10% effect is 50 points. Not exactly. On a 350 to 850, every credit score, so that would be a more modern Fair Isaac scoring range, 350 to 850. And whenever you create a score, like I said before, it's pieces of an algorithm within an overall algorithm. And what it's going to look at is whether it's 350 to 850 or 300 to 850 or 500 to 1,000, it's going to be trying to ascertain on a bell curve where everybody fits in line. So if somebody's credit gets better and yours stays the same, their score might surpass yours, even though anything necessarily wrong. So it's not really just a 10% effect is 50 points necessarily. It's just hard to compare apples and oranges. You can't necessarily compare a score on a 300 to 850 range to a score on 350 to 850. In most Fair Isaac scores, they're looking at somewhere between 35 and 50 scoreable codes, whereas Advantage, which Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion claim, whether or not it's been validated, that that's a better predictive scoring mechanism. There's 127 different scoreable codes that go into a Advantage score. It's a much more complicated, much longer algorithm. So you can't just say 10% here, 10% there. It's going to work only within that system, how much each part is affecting it. And then let's see. Next one. Sorry?
Okay, so James, I was going to suggest that we've addressed a couple of key questions here. Why don't you go ahead and finish with some of the general stuff that you wanted to share, general information, then we'll jump back into Q&A mode here in just a little bit, because I know you had a wealth of information you wanted to share with folks today, and then we'll get back into doing as many of these Q&A questions as we can through the top of the hour. But why don't you go ahead and kind of finish out some of the general background information, because I know there's a lot of stuff you normally share with an audience that you haven't quite gotten to yet.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some of these questions might get answered through the normal course of business too.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next slide.
Wow, this platform is having some significant challenges today. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you should be on the Generation 9 slide.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one that's very fresh and relevant right now. And this actually is going to answer one of those questions. So about 9 weeks ago, Fair Isaac Corporation, who is the one that obviously develops and markets FICO scores, came out with a press release that they had their Generation 9 score, which is being released this fall, should be within the next 5 or 6 weeks here, was going to have two very significant changes to the way it calculated the risk of the borrower. Number one, once a code or account that was coded as a third-party collection was paid, the algorithm was going to exclude that from calculating the final score, which is a radical change. They actually admitted in the press release that right now a paid and an unpaid collection have very, very little difference. Your balances, your debt might go down, which can it can increase your score a little bit, but essentially it's coding and scoring a paid collection, unpaid collection very similarly. Also, they said that in the new scoring algorithm that medical collections, even if they're not paid, would be lessened significantly on the amount they impacted the score, much less than a standard collection from a utility company or a credit card company, et cetera. And they got a lot of really great publicity of it. And to their credit, that is something they were trying to do to help consumers, for consumer advocacy. They weren't required to do it by Congress. The problems are threefold that really don't make that as big of a deal as people might hope it is or feel that maybe it should be. Number one is banks right now, every single bank that lends money, they have their own internal risk criteria. They don't depend solely on a third party to determine whether or not they have risk. They have their own criteria, and then they pick out a scoring algorithm that makes that. Well, there is no scoring algorithm right now that does what Fair Isaac is planning to do in this new one. So what that means is right now banks and mortgage companies and automobile dealerships, maybe not at the ground level, but in the people that are actually doing the risk management and doing the statistical modeling, they believe that paid collections are important to determine risk. They believe that medical collections are important to determine risk. If they didn't believe that, there would have been a lot more clamor to develop a score like this previously. And the bottom line is, for lending money, each bank gets to choose which scoring model they're going to use. As we said before, Fair Isaac alone has 23 different models with multiple industry specifications that they can sell to a bank. Bottom line, just because Fair Isaac makes this new Generation 9 available that has some great consumer things in it, doesn't mean anybody's going to purchase it. And from my contacts I've talked to, I'm not aware of anybody right now that is planning to use this score for risk anytime soon. That's part one. With part two, the GSEs, Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie. If any of you have any of your mortgage reports sit in front of you right now and you do a lot of FHA loans or anything that's backed really by any of the GSEs, you can look at it and there's a very high probability that you're going to see TransUnion being scored with Fair Isaac Classic 04. You're going to see Experian being scored with FICO V2 or Fair Isaac V2. You're going to see Equifax being scored with Beacon FICO FACTA Enhanced. The reason that those three particular scores out of all the ones that Fair Isaac has are being used are those the ones right now that are approved by the GSEs. So if you're going to have Fannie back a mortgage, you have to have those three scores available for them to do their underwriting for it. Those are actually 2004 Generation 6 scores. Generation 7 came out in 2008. Generation 8 came out in 2012, and then Generation 9 is the one that's being released this fall. So as it sits right now, they're already 2 generations behind. It's not that they don't want to change. They just haven't been able to get those approved for risk. Even if they did approve Generation 7 anytime soon, they would then probably have to go to Generation 8 before they got to Generation 9. So if you're talking about the vast majority of mortgages out there that are underwritten through GSEs, you couldn't even do this if you wanted to, probably for at least a decade, if ever. And then part three, for any scoring algorithm to work properly, you have to have appropriate information at the credit reporting agency. So I was alluding to earlier, you already have this huge amount of errors being created at the credit reporting agency side, not even taking into account errors that are produced and then reported from the credit subscriber, from the creditor side. If it's a third-party collection, for example, Midland Collection, that's reporting their third-party collection as a currently 90-day past due revolving account, even if it gets paid, it's still a paid revolving account because of the misreporting to begin with, and the system won't be able to remove it from the algorithm even if it wanted to because it's miscoded. So as long as you have errors on the credit reporting agencies, not only with this upcoming model, but with the current models, you're not going to have an accurate representation necessarily of the consumer with the false data included in the file. Okay? And I kind of answered this. Will anyone use it? As far as I know right now, the answer is most likely going to be no, because it's just, again, they have internal risk models and procedures now, and if this isn't in concordance with that, there's no reason for them to change. Okay? Eric, we can go to the next slide.
There you go.
Okay. So we're talking about here what laws actually govern the credit reporting agencies. And there's a lot of misinformation that gets out there about this and what's contained in these laws. The first and most important is the Fair Credit Reporting Act originally passed in 1971. It's been modified several times since that. But it's the basic law that governs credit reporting agencies and credit bureaus. And it tells them what they have to do in order to accurately and completely report, to get inquiries. If you've ever heard time frames for how long they have to respond to an investigation, those are all clearly spelled out within the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Essentially what it is when you mail something to a credit reporting agency, they have 5 days to process that mail. When they do so, they send something to the subscriber through their back systems. You want to know, it's called the actual investigation is either CDV or a UDF, depending on how you want to define it. It's sent through a system called eOscar to the subscriber or the creditor. Once they receive that, they have 30 calendar days at least to respond. Sometimes it can be 45. If you send additional information within the 30 days that's relevant, the subscriber will have an additional 15 days. If you have used your right to get a free credit report every year in the last 90 days, the subscriber will have an additional 15 days to respond. Nonetheless, it is still usually 30. Once all the subscribers respond, or if they don't respond within the 30, at the 30-day mark, the credit reporting agency will compile a report that includes all of the updates and mail it to the consumer. Bottom line with that means is anybody promises you results on a credit reporting agency in less than 3 days from a credit repair point of view, they most likely don't know what they're talking about. On the other hand, there is a system called Rapid Rescore. Hopefully a lot of you are probably familiar with that. Your bureaus might provide that service to you. That is actually something that you can charge for, not necessarily the consumer. That's kind of a gray area there that has never been litigated. But most mortgage companies don't want to be the test case to see whether they can charge consumers for it, and that's why they kind of eat the cost a lot of times. But it allows you to charge to change information that you have proof on, and that can actually be as fast as 72 hours. But aside from Rapid Rescore, it is not possible to guarantee that a subscriber is going to respond faster than 30 days, just like consumers have rights, so do subscribers. They have that right to that 30 days, and the credit reporting agency has the 5 days on the front and back to either interpret the investigation or compile their reports respectively. Likewise, the right to investigate the information does exist because of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The credit reporting industry as a whole existed from the 1880s until the 1970s, and it was completely unregulated for the most part completely unregulated at the federal level and mostly unregulated at the state level. And it was just a cozy little agreement between the credit reporting agencies and the creditors, and you had no right to view what they were looking at. We're a cost basis to them, so they would really like to go back to that point. Nonetheless, this law requires them to do that. And then perhaps most importantly, and obviously this is what I used to testify on in federal court with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, so I could go on and on about it, but I won't torture you like that. The last thing that is very important to understand, though, is the concept of how accurate information has to be. First of all, they don't have to report. It says specifically there's cost involved with reporting, and a lot of subscribers don't report, or they only report to one, or they only report to 2 credit reporting agencies, and that's why a lot of times they are different. As well, if they choose to report, that information they report has to be 100% accurate, complete, and verifiable. That's direct from the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and that's the standard that they should be held to. Okay? The Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, on the other hand, is a lot of times referred to as a law by itself, but truly it's just an amendment to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Now, the most substantial amendment that had been made to it since its inception, but an amendment nonetheless. And it was essentially designed to help prevent or solve identity theft. It created fraud alerts. It created a procedure that all credit reporting agencies have to follow when receiving a police report or an FTC fraud affidavit, a way for them to share that information, and also provided for all consumers to get 1 copy of each of the 3 major credit reports each year at no cost to review it for any potential identity theft. So that's that law. Now, I say state laws here just so you understand. No state can make a law that's going to be more restrictive. You can't take away consumers' rights at the federal level, but you can make it more restrictive on the subscribers and the creditors. So you have places like, for example, New York. Normally it's a 7-year standard for how long negative information can stay on file, but in the state of New York, if you have a charge-off or a collection or a judgment that's paid, it can only stay on file for 5 years. Likewise, there is no federal standard for how long an unpaid tax lien can stay on the credit report. The standard is that once it's paid, it can continue to remain on file for 7 years. But states like Arizona and California have said that that's excessive and put in state laws where it can only remain on for 10. Now, that's just a couple examples. Every state has their own credit reporting law with little tiny nuances, sometimes major that we know about that we can use. Other times it just doesn't It's just there to kind of reinforce federal so that state can say, hey, we've got one too. Let's move to the next slide, Eric. All right. We've kind of already talked about this just a little bit, but I don't think I got into the actual numbers. Starting with 60 Minutes, when they did their piece in February of 2013, they're the ones that found that 45% of credit reports had errors that looked to be originated at the credit reporting agency level and that were significant enough to either decrease or remove a borrower's ability to get funding. At the same time, the FTC did a report, actually released the day after the 60 Minutes expose, and their number was more in the 25 to 30% range. At the same time, the National Consumer Law Center did their report, and there's an attorney there named Chi-Chi who's been very, very involved with attorney generals and has been instrumental in really kind of exposing a whole lot of the problems that have existed with credit reporting agencies. And her organization believes that if you combine the errors that are generated at the credit reporting agency level and at the subscriber level and the mixed files and the identity theft, that you come up with a number in the high 80s to low 90s of the percentage of reports that have some sort of error on them. And it seems to be more heavily weighted towards people with perhaps less than perfect credit, most likely because the third-party collection companies tend to be the ones that report the most inaccurately and the most illegally in some cases as well. And just for your own amusement here, the CDIA, which is the trade organization for the credit reporting agencies and really all consumer data industry, that's what it is, Consumer Data Industry Association. They put up their report 2 days before 60 Minutes, and they claim that the error rate was only 2.2%. So just for your own application, that's kind of what the industry is claiming, whereas there's all these other organizations saying something far, far worse, as you can imagine. And then the next question comes, what errors are we talking about? Going to the third-party collections first, not to harp on them, but they tend to be the most inaccurate. We keep metrics on things like this, and we find that in excess of 90% of third-party collection accounts are reported inaccurately, whether it's reporting the wrong open date, whether it's reporting as the wrong code, whether it's reporting the wrong original date of delinquency, whether it's reporting payment history that doesn't exist. Sometimes, again, the Fair Credit Reporting Act requires completedness. If you're a third-party collection for a utility, or if you're the utility itself reporting as a collection, as TXU does, for example, and you're not reporting all the years of positive payment history, is that a complete account? Again, that's what federal law requires, and the consumer would be benefited by those years of positive payment history as opposed to solely being dinged for a utility collection. So that's something that we could probably talk about for years and years, but I want to make sure we get to more collections. Needless to say, every trade line is required to be accurate and complete. So anything, whether it's payment history or open date, or in the event of the original creditor that sold to a third-party collection, they're not allowed to report a balance. They have to delete it. You can only show them only one balance because they only owe it once. You can't show it as an open charge-off. You've got to show it as a transferred closed charge-off. Those are two of the places where an original creditor often makes huge mistakes that are detrimental illegally to the consumer. All right, let's see, Eric, I have one more slide here.
The next slide up is the Q&A slide. There was one question I was going to preview, and by the way, folks, as you're listening on, go ahead and feel free to to put in as many questions as you want right now while I'm asking James to address one of my favorite questions. Actually, it was one that was asked by somebody in the audience at one of the live events we did earlier this year. And one of the things that I found most profound, and just so you know, guys, one of the reasons that I will never have another credit expert on our webinar series other than James, because James' wealth of information is so deep. But like, give an example with the collections particularly. Not only what shocked me about some of what you've shared is just the complexity of how they make mistakes and how it can be so significantly detrimental to a borrower's credit. Like, for example, the date of last activity versus the date opened issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a common misconception, because a lot of times what's called the original date of delinquency or original delinquent date on a mortgage tri-merge will show up in a field that's called date of last activity. And rightfully, a mortgage professional might see that and see a change in score, and they can't see anything else on the credit report that changed on their mortgage report, and assume that the date of last activity caused their score to drop. I can tell you right now, the date of last activity is not something that goes into the credit score simply because it's not clearly defined. It can be the original date of delinquency. In that case, it is by chance impacting the score, but it's not because it's DLA, it's because it's ODD. It can be the last time the account was reported, the last time the account was used, the last time a payment was made. Because you can't put a mathematical definition on what DLA actually is, you can't include it in a score. So that's part one of the question. Part two is original date of delinquency. That is the federal standard for how long the 7 years can run. It's defined as the first missed payment that led to the most negative status without becoming current again with the original creditor. What that means is that if you have a third-party collection and you pay them and they put that paid date in the original date of delinquency field, which is most likely what happened when you see these significant or dramatic drops in score on a collection, they did something very illegal. They did what's called re-aging. They changed the date where the 7 years started to run to the date that it was paid. So they shaved off 5 years perhaps, or 6.5 years from the amount of time that that negative information comes down the report and from when it originated from. It happens with such frequency that it's hard to explain. And there's a multitude of reasons why that happens. Usually it's either by ignorance or malfeasance. Unfortunately, when you're talking about third-party collection companies, they're not just mean on the phone. And when I was with Experian, when we would get sued and I had to represent and put together, help our outside counsel put together a defense, they weren't just suing us, they were suing the other credit reporting agencies. They were suing the subscribers, the creditor, the third-party collection company, and we would have to work together on our defense. And to a company, I know a lot of third-party collection companies and their owners and their principals, and to a person, they were difficult to work with even when I was trying to defend them. And I can't imagine being the consumer having to deal with a lot of them. And a lot of times they just do things out of spite. And really what it comes down to also when they're doing it to try and collect money, then maybe they'll change the ODD because they know that it's going to negatively impact the score more than it would, and that makes it more likely that the consumer will pay. They have other dirty tricks that kind of work in this same regard as well, where they will have a trigger lead where if the consumer has a pull, an inquiry from a mortgage company, they're notified of it, and then they'll go in and illegally modify that information to make that collection much more impactful on the score, because they know because the person's trying to get a house, there's a high probability that they'll get paid. And I mean, there's, again, we could talk about the dirty tricks of the third-party collection company for eons here, but suffice it to say, that is a source of a lot of the misinformation, and some of it also is just reporting and having to report and having to respond to investigations is a cost center. The faster they can get it done and the less care they have to pay to it, even if you're a reputable creditor, the better for them. They'd rather focus their dollars on advertising and getting new customers and making money. And so if there's something they can get away with, a lot of the times, from their perspective, the risk is outweighed by the reward in their dollar savings. And like all big companies, whether it's a collection company or a creditor or even the credit reporting agencies, they do have money set aside for the errors they know are going to happen. And as long as it doesn't exceed that amount that's worked in, then they're going to continue to do business as usual because it's saving them money on labor and on the amount of data they have in their system that they can charge subscribers for, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, awesome, guys. Well, I'm going to jump in here. And Steve, by the way, those of you, we didn't introduce Steve on the call, but one of the other panelists on the program today is one of James' chief business development officers. Steve Emerson is also on the call, so Steve is going to be jumping in here to help me filter out some of these questions. But one of the questions that was asked here just right off the top at the bottom of the list almost is, James, what is the right answer when a borrower tells me the collection is going to fall off? And I'm going to add one little caveat to it. Assume it's an unpaid collection. So borrower comes in for a loan and we see this 6.9-year-old collection sitting on the bureau, and the borrower thinks they can wait 30 days and it's going to drop off their credit report. What do you tell them?
The first thing I would tell them is, and this kind of goes to some of the misconceptions, is that mortgage report, unfortunately, is not actually as accurate or complete as the consumer reports are. Like we said earlier, that DLA can be a lot of different dates. And so the first thing I would tell them is before we are sure of that, let's pull up the consumer credit report and see what they're using as the original date of delinquency. And that's going to be expressed on the consumer credit report as this account is scheduled to remain on file until XYZ date. I would say that if it truly is 6 years and 6 years and 10 months old, whatever, and you pull the consumer report and it does confirm on there that that's the date being reported as the original date of delinquency, that it is scheduled to fall off on that date, the consumer is probably pretty safe in believing that that is going to fall off. The credit reporting agencies have systems in place to purge data at that 7-year point, and as long as it is coded correctly on the consumer report, then they should be good to go. Obviously my caveat here would be, I think that when most consumers go look at their consumer report, they're going to be surprised / horrified to find that the third-party collection company is not in fact reporting the appropriate original date of delinquency, and therefore it won't be automatically purged. And a lot of times, unfortunately, when the consumer tries to address that themselves, they might meet some red tape and some roadblocks. However, that is the best advice to give them at that point is let's look at the consumer report. Federal law requires that any consumer disclosures contain the entirety of their report, be 100% disclosure. Whereas on the bureau report, the mortgage report, that particular bureau, be it CBCI Novus or Kroll or CoreLogic or whoever it is, they pick and chose the data points that they're going to include in that report, and it is under no circumstances ever going to be full disclosure because, again, they're trying to merge those 3 systems.
Okay. Just a follow-up question to that. How frequently do you see third-party collection agencies actually putting the date they got the account in as the original date of delinquency, obviously for the purpose of hammering the scores, but how often do you guys see that?
Virtually always, and there's a little-known thing. I think this isn't quite as common to actually be on the mortgage report anymore, but it used to be every single mortgage report you looked at, they just closed the rating in the form of a letter and number. So you might have an R1 account or an M2 account or an I3 account, et cetera. That shows, for M2, for example, that's a mortgage account that's currently 60 days behind. A lot of the times you don't necessarily see that rating, but it's still created by the bureau in the background to determine how that account is currently reporting. So there is actually a letter number combination that all third-party collection accounts should follow, and that's Y9. The reason that they have a separate letter of Y to code a third-party collection for rating purposes is so that certain aspects of the account will be excluded for scoring purposes. For example, the opening date. Whether they put the open date in the original date of delinquency or not, you can still have negative implications for the score if it's reported accurately except for the rating, because the open date is then going to get factored in with the average age of accounts and the most recent account opening, which are both scoreable codes that go into determining the overall score. So the Y is supposed to suppress that data. The collection companies know this, and that's why very often you'll see them rated as an O or an I, which is other or installment account, as opposed to the actual third-party collection, because they want that information to be factored in, even though it's illegal and incorrect, because it further negatively decreases the score.
Deceptive what they do. Certainly challenging for loan officers to work with borrowers on understanding it all and how to make it all work. I mean, how to help borrowers really with improving scores. And of course, there's the standards of that. But just looking through some of the questions here that we're trying to look for. And Steve, by the way, or James, if you see any of these questions that look like ones that would be worth tackling. I'm trying to filter through some of them.
Yeah, I've got one right here that says, is it possible to get a list of scoring codes? And it absolutely is. Believe it or not, it's public information out there. Where 10 is proportion of balance of credit, 34 is presence of collection on the report. We have that list, and I saw in here that David would like a copy of that. Steve, if you would just get his information and send him a copy of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. But yeah, that is public information for Fair Isaac. Let's see, another one. Let's use collection issue how to dispute. So the question is, if the original date of delinquency is 7 or more years, but the collection agency is showing 1013, how to dispute it? And I can tell you that we would contact the credit reporting agency and the creditor directly via mail. The creditor, I would send delivery confirmation mail, telling them that that this is an official request for reinvestigation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act and that they're reporting out of statute in violation of my rights. believe it or not, this is kind of upsetting, but the Fair Credit Reporting Act does give the right for reinvestigation. So when they're reporting negative information like that, if it hasn't been brought to the credit reporting agency's attention, then it's not actually illegal yet. The standard for the credit reporting agencies is willful noncompliance. So you do have to give them the opportunity to investigate. And I know that the time frames, and obviously we want to get deals closed as fast as possible, but that would have to be, you have to notify the creditor and the credit reporting agency of the error, wait for their response. If they remove it, okay. If they don't, then you've got leverage that you know, they're going to most likely remove it in that next round, because now you have proof that they've willfully violated the law. Okay.
Nice. All right. So, by the way, several people are asking for the list of the codes. By the way, anybody who wants more information about that, we can talk. We can, if you want to just go ahead and post that in the Q&A, I'll be forwarding the Q&A log to James and Steve as well for their follow-up purposes at the close of the webinar. All right. So, other questions. Which software version are you using now? How do they differ in terms of score? Tree account. Home. Okay. What advice? I'm looking for the best couple of questions here as we go through. And by the way, folks, continue to post your questions as we look through this list. Even if we can't get to all the questions live, we will be following up on them after the fact. Especially some of the technical difficulties at the beginning of the program, I will definitely be having James back on. I mean, I think I can have him on twice a month, and we still not run out of stuff to share and information to talk with people about. There was a question in here just in general. What are the best ways for consumers to get a hold of a copy of their consumer report?
Yeah, there's a few. For that, the consumer report, there's two different answers I'd like to give. Number one is that the CFPB, formerly FTC, run site is annualcreditreport.com. That is the clearinghouse, so to speak, where all Americans are entitled to one copy of each of the three credit reports each year. As it stands right now, you do not get a score with that, but you do get the report to review and look for inaccuracies. If you're interested in what I believe to be the most accurate of the consumer scores, it's still not going to be identical to what you get for lending purposes. Like I said before, every industry has their own score for that. But the closest you can come as a consumer is on myfico.com. That is the consumer portal for the Fair Isaac Corporation. So when you purchase a tri-merge report from them, you're going to get a consumer report, like I said, with 3 columns, and you're going to get a score that's a consumer score from Fair Isaac. Nonetheless, because FICO is so widely used, I believe that one would be the most accurate. Unfortunately, it also is one of the more expensive. I believe for all 3 reports and all 3 scores from myfico.com, the consumer's probably looking at somewhere around $40.
So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, James, which is, this kind of goes under the theme of the credit coaching thing that you and I have been talking about for many months. I mean, a good part of the loan officer's job these days is coaching their borrowers on how to essentially strategically enhance their score by removing inaccurate or erroneously reported credit data, and then also building positive credit behavior along with it. So when you're working with a client who is trying to actively build a better credit score, what are some sources or resources that you can get that you could use to help a customer get more timely information as they're going through that, sort of that score refinement process?
Sure. Well, and unfortunately, it's kind of a hot button issue for me because, and I do this periodically, and I did it for this this particular coaching session. I went in and Googled self-help, credit repair, self-help credit reports, and the myriad of incorrect information, whether it's supposed experts, even attorneys, telling you to close accounts or to call and ask for an increased credit line without considering the ramifications of the inquiry that's going to generate. There's a lot, like I said before, of miss or at least not fully correct information out there. So I'm going to selfishly suggest that if you go to my website, www.crecreditservices.com, we have one of the largest credit glossaries on there to talk about what all these terms mean. Blogs, articles, a wealth of information that is going to help steer you in the right direction. Obviously the number for mortgage professionals, the number 1 and 2 and 3 things that I can tell you to tell a consumer that are going to be always accurate is, number 1, if you pay your credit cards down as low as you can afford to do so before you make a major purchase and give it time to report, that is always going to help your score. Number 2, if you're about to make a major purchase, like a car or a home, it's probably best to not have any other types of inquiries, be it credit card or a utility or something like that on there. If possible, wait at least 90 days before you make that major purchase so the impact of that inquiry, if there is some, is lessened. And number 3, before you make a major purchase, go and look at your consumer credit report. Now, the scores, if you're not, you might not even, the scores might not matter necessarily because you're going to have a different industry score in there. But if you look at your report and you don't see any inaccuracies and you don't see anything wrong, and you, again, paid down those balances and you're doing what you're supposed to do, chances are the score is going to reflect that for risk. Obviously, the problem is when you do see those errors, making sure that they get handled. And obviously for the mortgage professional, they will already have, hopefully, the mortgage report before they go to the consumer. So.
Right. And getting them a copy of the consumer report as part of the mortgage lending is a great resource. All right, guys. Well, just before we hit the top of the hour here, I wanted to cover one quick thing. Obviously, NACSO Acceleration, we are a professional development coaching and training company. Our primary purpose is providing the value, support, and guidance you need to take your business to the next level. And we offer basically 3 different levels of service. Home study course programs and web shops, group or on-site coaching, and one-on-one personal coaching. One of the events that we have coming up is James has agreed to very graciously host for us a 4-part web shop program called Winning the Credit Scoring Game. And what we're going to be talking about is how you can become a certified credit coach, how you can learn in much more intricate detail than we would have time to do in a short webinar like we're doing right now. A lot of this background information that you guys have been asking a ton of questions about. James is going to be coming back for a 4-part web shop series, a special training available only to loan officers and real estate professionals who are interested in becoming, an advisor, a counselor, and how to help customers with overcoming the credit challenges that are preventing them from being able to obtain a home right now. It will run 4 consecutive Monday afternoons starting from 3 to 4 o'clock Central Time on November 3rd, and we'll run consecutive Mondays for that 4-part series. Now, of course, there's a major time investment in this as well for James and his team, so there is a little bit of an investment required for that program. By the way, if you want to go ahead and invest, hold on 2 seconds for me while I rearrange a few things on my screen so I can show you all this stuff. The basic program we're going to be looking at is regularly $497 for this type of a one-on-one training and coaching that James would provide in a group environment like this. I mean, like I said, you're going to get, and I know we'll probably go longer than the 1-hour time slot on those programs, but, regularly it would cost you about $497 to attend that kind of an in-depth training workshop, 6+ hours of training that you're going to get. We've worked out a special deal with James and his team where he's going to provide this web shop for only $297 a person. Now, if you're interested in registering, the best way to get hooked up with that is go to www.mxlcoach.com, and then you can jump to the shopping cart or webinar page. If you go to the webinar page, what you'll find is over on the right-hand side, there's a link to where you can click here to register for that program. Again, it's going to be a live interactive format where James is going to walk us through step-by-step how to do what essentially he and his team do at CRE Credit Services to help customers manage and enhance their scores. Of course, giving you some feedback and support material as well to how to help you do that. Of course, if you want to go ahead and get it for just $297, you can go ahead and enter the code CREMAX, C-R-E-M-A-X, in the shopping cart on the MXLCoach.com website. go to, again, mxlcoach.com/shop.html, or you go to our main website, click on the shop icon. That will take you into the shopping cart, which is then where you can actually click in, register, input the discount code CREMAX, and apply it to go ahead and pay and register for that event. Otherwise, if you're interested in more information about the Maximum Acceleration one-on-one sales and marketing coaching, business development coaching, one of the things we found out, the best way to help folks understand the true value of coaching is actually experience it. So we invite you to join us for a one-on-one, no-cost, no-obligation strategy session. You'll get some live, real-time coaching on one of your bigger challenges or opportunities for growth, and along the way talk a little bit about the pros and cons of coaching and when and if it makes sense for you to pursue it in enhancing your ability to reach your career goals. So we would love to have that opportunity to work with you in that respect. If there's anything that we can do, our only goal here is getting you from where you are to where you want to go as fast as humanly possible, which is why we bring on programs like this Winning the Credit Scoring Game, How to Become a Certified Credit Coach web shop. That, I mean, if you just think about the return on investment on that, guys, I mean, you know, one additional borrower in the next year that you help move from, from disqualified to qualified for a loan, you help that family overcome the credit obstacles that are preventing them from being able to obtain a home. Not only do you earn a commission that is, I mean, even on the most conservative comp plan, probably $800 to $1,000 per loan commission, you're already looking at about a 3 times return on investment for that training. Where else in the world can you get a 300% return on your money? And $300 isn't really that much to invest in the grand scheme of things if you think about it, for a one-time investment for the wealth of information that James and his team are going to share on this web shop program. I'm thrilled, excited, and couldn't extremely grateful that James has offered to provide this training for us, and that we've been able to work out a deal to bring that coaching to our audience, because I think it's probably one of the most valuable tools and resources in today's lending environment for helping borrowers move from denied to approved and being able to move forward and being able to buy a home. And I can't recommend enough that I mean, everybody on this webinar should make that investment to learn the level of detail it takes to really help enhance those scores. So with that being said, that's kind of the end of the commercial here. I'm happy to go back to Q&A mode at this point if you are, James. Looking through here while I've been rambling for the last few minutes, did you see any additional questions that you'd really love to jump on?
Individually.
Yeah, we're going to answer a few more of them, and also just in case we miss one or if anybody has any additional questions, Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first.
Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Emerson. If it's okay, I will follow up with each and every one of you individually via email. If you don't want me to, that's fine as well, but I can. There's several questions about how to market our services or credit services, period. There's other credit questions on here, anything that James didn't cover. I'll be happy to do that, and I will follow up with each of you and just share a little bit more about what we're about, and certainly how we can help you help your clients. So that'll save a little bit of time on this, and you'll get some one-on-one attention from me.
Definitely, definitely. And just so you know, guys, Steve is also the person who manages CRE's affiliate program, which is actually a really cool program you got to check into. But like I said, that combined with the credit coach training, winning the credit scoring game training, you really will be able to put yourself in the position of being a recognized expert in your community as far as how it comes, as far as becoming the resource that's going to make the difference for a lot of families in overcoming the credit barriers that are blocking them from getting a home right now. All right, so James, you feel free to jump on any of these questions that you want to.
Sure. Gerard asked a question about why are disputed accounts a problem now when buying a home, and he hit the nail on the head with one part of it for sure. Is it's only a problem with buying a home. You don't see any auto deals or credit card deals or student lending deals or RV deals being held up because those codes are on file. Basically, what has happened is
They wouldn't get anything sold.
Yeah, exactly. During the first 30 days when an account is actually under investigation. So during that time frame when it's been sent out by the credit reporting agency and the creditor has not yet responded to the investigation, there are aspects of the account that are actually suppressed, specifically the payment and balance history in most scoring algorithms, not all, but most, are suppressed during that investigation time. So that's where the myth comes that things pop back on the credit report. The truth is they were never removed. The investigation was started, and while it was under investigation, they were suppressed. But because the government, in this case, whether it be HUD or FHA or USDA or Freddie or Fannie or Ginnie, knowing that two of those aren't actually government entities, they're worried that someone could artificially manipulate their score that way. And their system, quite frankly, can't tell the difference between an account that's currently under investigation and an account that was investigated in the past and the consumer doesn't disagree. The Fair Credit Reporting Act allows consumers to add statements of continued dispute, and in some instances requires subscribers to add a statement of continued dispute for certain types of investigations. Those types of codes, the ones that you're seeing most often, are not impacting the score at all. But because DU can't differentiate between a current and a former investigation, it's kicking all of them back. And depending on the bank and the place, you actually do have some underwriters that are recognizing, hey, that's a dispute code on a positive account, or that's a dispute code that the consumer originated, and go ahead and just manually underwriting them. Unfortunately, because a lot of people don't do that, a lot of underwriters don't do that, a lot of companies don't approve that, it's getting kicked back otherwise. In fact, if they were actually just discriminating based on dispute codes, which is not technically their policy, they're just not good at differentiating again. The ECOA actually says verbatim that it is illegal to decline lending based on a consumer's exercising their rights under the consumer protection laws. Well, the Fair Credit Reporting Act is a consumer protection law and allows you to add a statement of continued dispute. It's just that worry that those ongoing investigation codes are going to manipulate the score, even though they don't. And when you think about it from a logical perspective, if a consumer could put on a long-term dispute statement of continued dispute and manipulate the score on a regular basis, then the risk models might as well not be there for every single other industry but mortgage. You could go and put a dispute code on every single account and go to Kohl's, and even though you should be a 550, you look like a 720 because all of the balance history and payment history is suppressed on those counts. Obviously, that's not the way it works. That's not the way the algorithm works. It's just, again, it's a miscommunication or a technical difficulty on how they're determining which dispute code is on file. Let's see, what's some other ones here? Nonetheless, I guess if it's a problem for you, you can rapid rescore to try and get them off. We have a system for trying to that can get them off. It just depends on the individual situation. Unfortunately, I do know that that is a problem for a lot of lenders and mortgage professionals right now. It really shouldn't be, but it's kind of one of those situations that it is what it is.
Okay. James, while you search for the next question, there's one I wanted to jump into here.
Sure.
A couple of quick questions. One question was about the consumer, the Certified Credit Coach designation. Yes, CRE Credit Services has agreed to also offer that designation. As part of this training program, you will receive a certificate that has that designation included as part of the program. The other thing that Glenda asked the question is, how can we find people who need credit repair to buy a home? Will you be covering how we market this service? Glenda, it's interesting. We hadn't really originally planned on that as part of the four-part series as we had outlined it, but I wouldn't have any problem whatsoever adding a fifth session. And James, I know your time is very tight, and you may not necessarily have the ability to do that fifth session, but I wouldn't have any problem putting in a bonus session that talks about the marketing of it. Doing essentially score enhancement and understanding your credit score type of educational workshops, whether it be for realtor groups or whether it be for local employers in your community and those kind of things, that's an incredibly powerful way of finding not only borrowers who need credit repair, but also borrowers who have decent enough credit that they're pretty close to being able to buy a home right now anyway. Again, anytime you step out there and educate consumers on how to, better achieve the goals that they have for financial growth and homeownership, you're going to be the recognized expert and therefore the most likely choice when it comes to choosing a service provider for a borrower. So that can be an incredibly powerful marketing approach and strategy.
Yeah, and I think what I'd like to do is just as there's a three-part answer to that. Number one, absolutely, and I actually I would be there for question and answer and everything on that, but perhaps that fifth part, it will probably be Steve, because that's his focus. That's the primary responder on there. And I know that as part of Steve's follow-up with everybody that wants it, he's going to talk about that in his emails and everything else. And then also, just for those who are still on the call right now, I think Steve can give you a quick overview of how the initial starting to get that rolling would work. If you want to do that real quick, Steve.
Well, I was actually going to go a different route. I work with all kinds of mortgage professionals, and of course they team up with realtors and title companies. You got to think of what do most people with credit issues do? They rent. So just, I won't go into detail here, but some of the strategies some of the people I work with do, they'll do direct mail campaigns, canvassing campaigns, in the targeted audiences, both apartment complexes, certain zip codes where there's a high rental rate, so that they can kind of capture that. So start to think outside the box that way of how you can reach out. Most people aren't looking for people that have credit issues. So that might be a pretty neat way to do it, and certainly others are doing it, and it's something you can measure, and it's pretty cost effective as well. And I'll be happy to go ahead.
Well, especially what James, I think you were alluding to with the high concentration zip codes or postal routes, is you can even leverage the new USPS Every Door Direct Mail campaign, for a fraction of the cost of what it used to cost to do direct mail. You can certainly incorporate that into a marketing campaign as well. So yes, definitely we will be communicating that. All right, other questions related to some of the fine print of the credit enhancement and the score enhancement coaching process. While we have James on here, and he really is truly the expert. And James, I've heard you share so many things that I wasn't aware of. I mean, I openly share with everybody, guys, that I learned more from a 45-minute program of James's the first time I heard him speak than I had learned having gone to a full 2-day training workshop put on by the marketing and PR team from Equifax. Back in 2011, I went to a 2-day training workshop on understanding credit scores and the scoring models and all that kind of stuff. I got more out of James's 45-minute presentation than I did out of that full 2-day workshop, because it was basically just a PR event. Equifax trying to make themselves look good. I don't think they did it very effectively, but anyway.
Experian, so.
Yeah, I know. It just to their credit, I mean, obviously they get used and abused just as much as we do as originators. But I'll tell you what, looking at it from the perspective of now seeing the trend in the industry, especially with CFPB coming online as regulatory oversight for these credit reporting agencies, we've seen a significant improvement in the quality of consumer experience and the ability to remove stuff. But there's still some very complicated issues that James will be teaching us in this 4-part web shop, and
Don't happen.
the data last activity box and the miscoding. That was the one that shocked me. Is I didn't realize that not all collections are created equal. A third-party collection agency that some of the stuff, James, you shared about that kind of stuff, with just the way that some of these third-party collection agencies purposefully miscode stuff, and what it can do from a score enhancement perspective to correct those miscodings, how powerful that can be. All right, do you guys see any other questions that you just are jumping out at you that you just have to answer?
Yeah, there was one that asked, can you demand that a third-party collection delete an account once it's paid? And the simple answer is, yeah, you can. They don't necessarily have to. Now, I will tell you, a lot of times you'll have third-party collection companies that say that they can't legally remove an account. Well, as we covered earlier, nobody has to report to a credit reporting agency, and they can choose not to. Another concept that's a lot of the times kind of misrepresented is the idea of doing a restrictive endorsement. So you pay a collection company with a check, and you put a restrictive endorsement on the back of it requesting that they delete that account in exchange for payment. Well, a base level principle of contract law is that there has to be consideration on both sides. So if you pay them what you owe them and ask them to delete it in exchange for paying it, you're not offering any consideration, and that's not necessarily a valid contract, even though by cashing it, theoretically they did agree to it. Because you didn't offer any consideration, most courts aren't going to consider that a fully formed contract. On the other hand, if you offer a sum of money, and I usually say $10 or $15, not people are like, well, why can't I just do 50 cents? Well, you could, but I mean, they're going to have actual costs. They're going to have to pay somebody that's an hourly employee and change their tape and update it through the system. So they have some hard costs there. So offering, $10 or $15 above and beyond what the agreed amount you're paying is, whether it's a paid in full or a settlement, either way, as long as you have an agreed amount that's going to pay that account in full, and then adding another $10 or $15 and putting a restrictive endorsement that in exchange for that $10 to $15 that they're agreeing to delete that is an absolutely legal and binding contract. So there are ways aside from them just agreeing, and then at the same time, some collection companies, they will agree to that. They just want their money. So it depends on the circumstance and it depends on the collection company, but there are several different ways to go about that. And one of our bedrock principles here is that I never encourage anybody to not pay a debt that they feel they legally owe. However, if you're paying a third-party collection, either with us or on your own, make sure and validate and get some paperwork there. I can't tell you the number of horror stories we've encountered where somebody's had to pay, unknowingly, they just don't understand their rights, but they've paid the same collection over and over and over and over again, where they pay one collection company, and that collection company takes the money and then resells that debt with a portfolio of debt to another collection company, and again and again, and it's just it's a common enough problem that I would never recommend somebody pay a third-party collection without a whole lot of documentation with account numbers and other things proving that it's paid. And in a perfect world, especially if it's a medical or utility or something along those lines, trying to get it back to the original creditor and paying it through there. Obviously, if it's been sold, straight up sold to another third-party collection, that's not going to be a viable option. But a lot of these collection companies are actually factoring companies. They're agreeing to be like an outsourced collection company where they're going to take a percentage of what they collect. They don't actually have an upfront cost. In those situations, getting it back to the original creditor and simply paying the original creditor can often be a lot better option. And again, this is all, it's that gray area. It just depends on the situation. Let's see.
There was one I caught that caught my attention that I'd be interested in you addressing, James, so long as we have a few minutes. And again, we're obviously 20 minutes over what we had planned on originally here. We still have a huge group of people on here. I'm assuming you probably do have some appointments you've got to get to, as do I.
I got about another.
So we can't go forever. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are still remaining online, you're welcome to hang on as long as you want. Obviously, James will have a time limit for when he can go. But the one question that was in here is, if information on the credit report is accurate and prospect scores are still too low to qualify, what general amount of time with on?
Shoot. You still there, Eric?
What happened?
Did I drop out?
Yeah, you did.
Okay, I'm back. I didn't do anything on my end. I don't know.
The system's acting up a little bit. But I think I get the gist of the question. Essentially, so it's something on there that is accurate, complete, verifiable, everything, they've done everything according to plan, which does happen for sure. There are creditors that get their act together and report correctly. It is true that as the time progresses from that original date of delinquency, that the weight of that information is going to lessen. Also, you have to understand that the 6 month and 2 year time frames are exceptionally important. If you've gone 2 years since and had no additional delinquency or collection and nothing, and sometimes that's a little bit of a misnomer because maybe one of those collections is actually 5 years old, is misreporting, of course, but if you have no negative information in the last 2 years, your score is going to benefit from that greatly. So I think that that's probably the best benchmark to look at. If somebody's keeping their nose clean, maybe they, so many of our customers, they're not bad people. They're not at bad risk. They went through a divorce. They had a sick kid. They screwed up in college, but now they're newlyweds and they're trying to get their life together. They had an extended layoff during the recession. There's a myriad of different reasons that somebody might look like more of a risk in their report than they actually are. But in general, if they've been able to keep their nose clean and build new positive history for 2 years, they're going to look a lot better. So if you've got somebody that's 18 months, but they're really steady now and they have some bad stuff that's 18 months old now, 6 months from there, they should be looking a lot better. And then it's just going to be a question of underwriting and things like that. And I will also say, for anybody in any of those situations, our consultation with one of our expert credit analysts is 100% free every time. We're going to go through it. We're going to educate them. I always say I didn't leave Experian because they weren't paying me well. I left because I felt called for the consumer advocacy. And so even if somebody that we can't help or that doesn't need our help, we're still going to educate them and give them the best possible advice that they can get on how to build and maintain their credit. So we're always willing to help with that, whether or not we're going to get a client out of it or not. So that's a resource that I want to make sure everybody knows is available there. There was one other. Go ahead. Well, let me jump in here, and I want to dovetail off that question really quickly, James, which, guys, as you well know, there's also the element of the reason we called the web shop winning the credit scoring game is because think about, I mean, this is mathematical calculations. It's pluses and minuses, right? You get positive points for what lenders consider to be responsible credit behavior. You get negative points for what they consider to be irresponsible behavior. So if you've got some old junk that's negative and derogatory in nature that is giving them a bunch of negative points, one of the best things you can do for score enhancement is help them build positive points by giving them support, guidance, and coaching. And James, I know your team is strong advocates of that as well. That is a lot of what we're going to be going into as part of that 4-part web shop series that James is going to be doing. Again, that starts on Mondays at 3 o'clock Central Time on November 3rd. If you want to get registered for that program, I highly, highly encourage you to do so. If you use the discount code CREMAX, it will you'll be able to register for only $297. You go to our mxlcoach.com website. You can click on the Shop tab, and that will take you into the shopping cart. Excuse me, I got the wrong slide up here real quickly. If you go to the mxlcoach.com website under Shop, and then that's where you can link into the shopping cart, you can go ahead and jump in there and select under the DVD Home Study Course menu the Winning the Credit Scoring Game web shop, and of course apply the discount code CREMAX in all capital letters. That'll drop it from $497 to $297. For that investment. Again, one additional loan in the next 12 months that you get from helping a customer win the credit scoring game and overcome the scoring hurdles that are blocking their ability to qualify for a loan. Most loan officers make minimum of $1,000 to $1,500 commission per loan, even in today's environment. And you're going to you're talking a 350% return on your $300 investment at that point. Can you afford not to? To take that time, energy, and effort to invest in your knowledge and ability to help your clients win the credit scoring game. Anyway, James, there was one more question you said you wanted to tackle just before we kind of sew this thing up. Sure, real quick. It's the question was, is this I'm sorry, wrong question. Now I'm not seeing it here, but the question was basically, is there a specific date each month that the creditors update the credit reporting agency? And the answer is no, there's not. Information is still updated monthly by the banks and all the creditors at the credit reporting agencies via sequential data tapes. I know that sounds antiquated, but it's the best way they've been able to figure out that they can go up on a stand and tell a jury that no human hands touched that data at Experian. It was put into batched and put into a computer system. Every 12 hours, the information on a report can change based on whichever tapes they received or whichever updates through eOscar they've received in the last 12 hours. So the credit reports do change every 12 hours. I will also say, though, if you're looking at a credit card statement, federal law since 2010 does require that if the credit card company, the credit card issuer, is going to update data on the credit report on any date aside from the statement date, that they have to disclose that in a separate field. So in the absence of a field saying, hey, we report to the credit reporting agencies on this date, if that field's not there, you can pretty safely assume that they're putting it on a tape and sending it to the credit reporting agencies on the date of the statement. Now, obviously, the problem exists there that if you have been given the incorrect advice that you should max out your credit cards every month and then pay them down, well, if you're waiting for your statement and then mailing a check and it's only updating one time per month, then it's going to update showing you maxed out every single month. And they're really not going to have a record of you paying that account. They're just going to show it maxed out. So that's why I say, before you make a major purchase, pay those credit card balances down as low as you can, preferably below 10%. We'll talk about why it's percent during the course, but pay it down below 10% and wait 35 days. Obviously 31 should be sufficient, but I say 35 because Murphy's Law, the first time I say 31 is the date that a tape gets kicked under a cabinet and it doesn't update in time. So I say 35, down below 10%, and 35 days.
Well, there's a...
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, what I was going to say in that is you just triggered something for me that would be a very effective coaching strategy for clients. I mean, encourage them to pay their credit card bills online a couple of days before the statement cycle date. So, for example, if you have a credit card that cycles on the 25th, if you go online and pay it on the 22nd or 23rd, as opposed to waiting until the statement cycles and then paying it, which is effectively a day or two later, it would have a very positive impact on your score, because if you make let's say you've got a $1,000 balance and you pay that balance off, the day before the statement cycles, your actual reported open balance on that account is going to reflect much lower than waiting 3 days until after the payment cycles.
Absolutely correct.
Just hit me like a ton of bricks when you said that, and I couldn't resist jumping in on that one.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I know James has to leave here because I know you've got another appointment you need to get to. I need to jump off as well. So, folks, at this point in the game, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's program. If there's anything else that our team can do for you here, we're going to leave the webinar platform open for